Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
We are so glad that you have joined us for today's episode, and it's going to be an awesome one. Before we get to the content, though, let me remind you to go over and subscribe to our podcast. You can do that on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, or any podcast listening app, whatever your favorite is. Subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And we ask that you rate our podcast. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/CLP to rate our podcast. That helps us get the word out about it. And also, we ask you to share with everybody you know who needs to be encouraged and equipped to lead the local church, because that is our mission. Now for today's episode.
We're so glad you're joining us this week. We have a special guest with us, our friend Matt Alexander, who serves as the senior pastor there at First Baptist Church of Gadsden, Alabama. Matt, we're so glad that you're taking time out of your schedule to join us on the podcast this week, man.
Man, it's great to be here. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely, man. We're excited to have this conversation with you, and watching you, I guess, from somewhat afar. I mean, we've been in the same room a few times and talked a few times, but just watching God use you, it's been encouraging to us. And so we want to talk a little bit about how God has used you there and in that ministry setting. You've been there about 8 years, yep. And you've seen a lot of stuff. And so one of your passions is church revitalization. That is our passion as well. And so you've seen God over those 8 years revitalize that church. So, for those listening who don't know and those watching who aren't aware, Gadsden's not a tiny town. It's not a really small town, but it's kind of a typical traditional Southern town. And so there's some unique challenges and opportunities, I think, pastoring in a church like that. So tell us a little bit about how God has used you there and really some of the unique things that you have encountered pastoring in that setting.
Yeah, so I was 26 years old when my wife and I moved to Gadsden. So I was finishing up. I was pastoring in Kentucky, in rural Kentucky, right outside Louisville. I was finishing up my seminary degree, and I actually had like 17 hours of seminary left when I moved to Gadsden. So most pastors here over the years had doctoral degrees at some level or another, and so. It was a big risk at a lot of levels, I think, for the search committee to bring me here at my age and experience level and all this kind of thing. So I always say, for me, the biggest thing in terms of church revitalization that I think is important is to remember you're not the belle of the ball. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of guys feel like they're kind of slumped, like, well, I really can't go to a big church and a great church or a growing church. So to make myself kind of look like I'm choosing this fate, I'm going to say I'm really passionate about church revitalization, and this church is just really lucky to have me, kind of thing, And I think all of us at different levels have felt that temptation. And so like I said, I've been here a little over 8 years now. So we've had some pretty typical, a little ahead. I read an article several years ago by Tom Rainer about just different milestones in ministry, and particularly in revitalization is really helpful. And we've hit all the milestones pretty much. And I think during that time, he said the most fruitful years are years kind of 7 to 10-ish, something like that. And we've been a little ahead of the curve on a lot of those milestones, but we've seen that to be the case. And so that's been a good thing. I think in terms of, I always say, I think Mark Dever, I heard one time, said, we call it church revitalization now. 50 years ago it was called pastoring. But First Baptist Gadsden has historically been a very influential church, not only in the region but really in the state. It's a well-known church. And a lot of folks who have led broadly in the state have come out of this church. A lot of men who were later called a ministry came out of this church. So then it had been in decline really in pretty sharp decline for about 30 to 40 years. It was just been kind of a steady decline. So every 10 to 15 years, the church was losing about 150 in attendance. And we were under 150 when I got here. So, I said, you don't have to be great at math to figure that out.
Got about 15 years left.
Well, I said the money runs out before we get to zero. And so, and that kind of thing. So, we kind of recognized, and looking back on it, 8 years in, we can kind of look back on it and see that if we hadn't done some things and made some changes, it could have been disastrous for the church on a lot of levels. And I think any man who's pastoring a church right now knows exactly what we're talking about and going through. Gadsden is not a tiny town, but it's just big enough to sort of be victimized by some of the issues that have hit urban centers over the last 20, 30, 40 years. So you had a real kind of suburbanization in Gadsden where a lot of people kind of left downtown, left the city center, those sorts of things. And then furthermore, Gadsden's kind of been plagued and troubled by the loss of industry and things like that, where that's kind of hurt the city center, even though the population of the county's held steady in a lot of ways. So what I always say is our church has dealt with everything from very large and aging facilities to parking challenges, to, unfortunately, over the years, there has been some kind of infighting and conflict in the past. And then two, there's just this sort of, when a church has been the premier church and done well for a long time, I don't know if y'all noticed this, even Christian people seem to kind of enjoy it when things aren't going well. That's something I really can't comprehend. I'll tell you what, one time I met this guy, and I'd been here for 2 or 3 years, and I said, hey, we just kind of hit it off, had a good conversation, and he said, now, where are you the pastor? And I said, First Baptist Gadsden. And he said, now, where's that again? I said, downtown. We're catty corner from Johnson's, 5th and Walnut. It's a big yellow brick church. He said, First Baptist Gadsden, right? I said, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. He said, no, that church is closed.
Oh, wow.
And I said, no, it's not. I work there. I preach there he said, no. I was told somebody that I was going to go visit that church, and they said, no, that church is dead. You don't want to go there. Come to my church, kind of thing. And so I said, he really, we volleyed a couple times over whether our church was open or not. And I said, hey man, I'm telling you, I'll show you a pay stub. You know what I mean?
Every day.
I promise I'm the pastor there. And he's like, well, man, I like you. I would have come to visit or something, And I always say, that's nothing my people did. That's nothing this church did. There's just a sense in which sometimes people kind of relish a church that had been successful in the past and done well in the past. And I get that. I mean, we all meet people who are going to a church that's growing and thriving, and they're prideful about it or condescending about other churches. And, so that's been, just kind of a reputation wasn't always fair, was a challenge for our church as well. We're also a traditional church. And so I think over the years, I call it kind of the bless your hearts factor that comes along. And we're still a very traditional church, joyfully so. But I always say to our staff and our folks, I say, we want to make sure it's really clear that we're this way on purpose. We want anyone to ever come to our church and think, bless their hearts. We know there are other options, I know Hillsong exists, unfortunately. And I'm just, I know that stuff is out there, and we are choosing to worship this way and to honor and maintain that identity we've had in the past. So that's a challenge is trying to help people see, no, we didn't get stuck in a time warp. And maybe there is that case with a lot of churches, but that's one thing I want to say to a lot of guys who are taking on church revitalization efforts. I think they come in and what they immediately think, bless their hearts, this is, we're stuck in a time warp here. And what they want to do is say the way to remedy that and to fix that is to change everything and bring everything up to date. And I always say, you're actually working harder, not smarter when you do that, because more and more people don't necessarily want what one friend of mine calls tennis shoe church. And I thank God for that. You know what I mean? Like we praise God for that. We talk a lot here about how thankful we are that the Lord's given us different kinds of churches. I think a lot of guys want to just rip the DNA out of a church, right? And just immediately shift over to whatever church down the road is doing to try to reach young people. And what they wind up doing is just sort of superimposing something that is not a natural fit. So they wind up being just sort of the poor man's version of a healthy church downtown. And it becomes actually like, instead of just a single bless your heart, it becomes like quadruple bless your heart. Because you got a lot of people that not only miss the way they were doing church and it was not really being done with excellence. Well, now they hate the way they're doing church now, and it's not being done with excellence.
Right.
So I always just say, let's turn up the factor. Let's take what we do and do it really well and help the church grow in that. We said we honor our past and embrace our future at the same time, honor the DNA of the church, and figure out, I always phrase it like this, like we're First Baptist Church Gadsden. They say we're really good at being First Baptist. You know, like that's who we are. That's who we are by nature. I could beat my head against the wall, and I'm not going to get First Baptist Church to stop being First Baptist. You know, it's who they are. And don't go. Man, I shouldn't have come fighting like that. You know what I mean? If I'm not into that, I should just don't go. But then I say we need to, but two areas we can grow in and always do better. We can always be more faithful. We can do a better job of being the church. That's the most important thing. That comes before we're First Baptist, before we're anything, before we honor our pastor or anything else, we honor the Lord. Now, let's figure out how we can take our DNA of being First Baptist Church, honor Jesus as the church, and then say in 2020 or when I got here, 2012 or whatever else, we're in Gadsden, Alabama right now. Okay, how do we take who we are and what it means to be the church and reach Gadsden with that? How do we make those people feel welcome and see that we love them and care about them? And so thankfully we were able to then to cultivate what I call like a ministry of addition rather than a ministry of subtraction. So a lot of things are already in place and folks love them. Just leave them like they are and then start new stuff. And people don't mind, as long as you're loving them and cherishing them. And so we were able to add a lot of ministries that were able to speak and reach out to young families and others. And our people rejoiced in that. They rejoiced in that. They loved it. So
I think everything you're talking about, Matt, is just, so relatable to the average pastor.
That's right.
You're talking about things that, it's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. It's not, people want a silver bullet. They want a quick fix. If they realize their church is in decline or had a long season of stagnation without growth. They're wanting the how can you tell me, Matt Alexander, Mr. Church Revitalization Specialist, how can you tell me how to fix my church in 6 months?
Yeah,
what would you say to those guys?
I would just say you can't. And the harder you try to do it in 6 months, the more likely that you'll be trying to figure out how to fix another church.
That's right. 6 months down the road.
And I think, what you're talking about though, there is this kind of urgency that we feel. I'll never forget my first Sunday, this precious saint of the Lord. She's with the Lord now. She came up to me. She said, "We got a young preacher and his young pretty wife, and y'all got a little baby. And now it's going to be so easy for us now to reach young families." And
that's what people think. Hire the young guy.
They do. And I would say first of all, young pastors are overrated. So they are not a silver bullet, like you said. Second of all, there isn't a silver bullet. And I will say though, I do think that biblical faithful preaching is the Archimedean point from which a church turns. Now, there's all kinds of other important work. I don't want anybody to get mad, or whatever else. There's all kinds of other important work. But I still think every aspect of the church is impacted by the preached word.
Absolutely.
And every aspect, from our one-on-one discipleship, group discipleship, Sunday school, the culture of a church and the formation of disciples, it begins with the local church. With the preaching of the word in the local church. So, obviously I'm going to say I'm biased. I would just say if I was encouraging a guy to go revitalize a church, I would say start with a commitment to biblical preaching, and define it well, define biblical preaching well. And I define biblical preaching typically as expository preaching, but I'm not going to go all in on that because I don't want people to get too mad about it. But it's just faithfully preach the text and let the text drive the pulpit. That's kind of, I think you were to ask our people or anyone here, I think they would by and large say that's the biggest contributing factor for us and then what happened then is we began to catch a vision for what the scripture teaches about what the church should be and what we should be doing, driven from the word. It's word first, not strategy first. Well, then we begin to get a vision for reaching young families and for reaching our city. And people begin to see the bigness and glory and greatness of God. And these little things, they still matter. It doesn't have to not matter, but they begin to catch a vision for that, and it just greases the wheels,
Yeah.
And
it's amazing when you help people engage in the word of God and the gospel, it's amazing what can happen.
Yeah. And listen, some dude is going to be listening to this and he's going to say, I've been preaching the word faithfully for 10 years and I'm still getting my tail end kicked at every deacon's meeting. I understand that. And I don't, I'm not such a pie in the sky kind of guy. Nothing drives me crazier than the guy's right. If you'll just preach the word, your church will grow or whatever else. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I mean, that's not true.
Right.
It's not true. There are churches that are dying right now that have pastors who are more faithful to the word than I am in the pulpit every Sunday. But I don't think any recipe for turning a church around can skip the crucial ingredient.
Right. Yeah, you can have the great strategies and ministries and programs, but man, if the lead teacher is not teaching faithfully God's word, it's going to be for naught every time. Absolutely.
Or it's just going to wither on the vine. Whatever
right.
fruit and growth you see will eventually wither on the vine, I think.
Or people will leave and go to a church that is preaching faithfully.
Right. And I'll just say, or a church who's not preaching faithfully better than you, and
that's a good point.
I mean, that's just kind of part of it.
Hey, that's a dose of reality. Well, let me ask you this, because something you said, we've talked around this a little bit, but faithfully preaching the word is really important. So have you had to fight the battle of, we're in the, the Bible Belt, right? Have you had to fight the battle of the gospel or God's word versus politics? Because a lot of people make those two things synonymous, at least.
Yeah, I'm sure I've got some folks who wish I would do a little more on politics, but by and large, they don't tell me that. Yeah. But I'm telling you, man, I am spoiled by the saints at First Baptist Gadsden. I've preached on politics a few times. I always just say, when I have, the folks who you think are either not gonna like, kind of not like it. And one Sunday I preached on politics, and I remember thinking, I wonder if this guy's gonna give me grief after this. And both of the men, that one's very right and one's very left. And both of them came up to me after church and both said, Pastor, thank you. I needed that sermon.
Oh, wow.
Today. And not just on politics, but on so many issues. I'll just say, recently I preached on something and someone who I thought, if anyone's going to get mad today, it's going to be this person. Right. And they came up to me afterward and I can't remember who it was now, but I just remember this moment. And they said, Pastor, thank you. I so desperately needed to hear what the Lord had to say about that in my heart and my life. I thought, Matt, you stinking coward. You wanted to let your fear of man get between the Lord Jesus Christ and that sheep who desperately needed to hear his word that Sunday. And you were more afraid of what he would think than whether or not he heard what the Lord had to say to him that day. And I thought, what cowardice that is. So I would just say, anytime we preach on a hard text and somebody comes up and says, man, you're brave to preach on that, preacher. I said, no, I'm too much of a coward. I just want to fear God more than I'm afraid of you. Hopefully, I hope you'll pray for me for that. I need them to pray for me that I'll be bold in preaching what God would have me preach. Yeah. So I just say a few things that I've learned. One, if I address it in the pulpit from the word, people are 1,000,000 times more receptive than if I share it on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. Yep. Baptists I think a lot of people misunderstand Baptists. They think that they don't want you to deal with hot topic issues. It's not that so much as if you will deal with it from the word in the pulpit, you get so much more grace from Baptist people because they believe they have a high view of the pulpit, and they believe that their preacher ought to be able to have freedom, by and large, to preach his conscience and the scriptures from the pulpit. And so even when people have disagreed with me, when I do it from the pulpit and clearly from the pulpit, they like that a lot more. Whereas when I've gotten in a mess over the years dealing with hot button issues, it's almost always been something I've written or something I've shared on Facebook or something like that, where it begins to get a life. But, we owe it to our churches, right, to deal with things in-house. They just don't want their preacher getting out away from them and embarrassing them or anything else like that. So we have to be careful, or feeling like they've been, you're posting this on Facebook. It was really convicting for me, and I feel excluded by my pastor now, rather than when it's in the pulpit. It's sort of like a covenant moment. We're all together. It's clearly in love. I've got the right tone. They know me. They know it's from the text. I preach expository sermons, so they know I didn't just decide to preach on this week. It just goes a long way when you're dealing with any sort of hot button issues. And then several years ago, I purposed to say I want to have okay, so I think the scripture has a meta narrative, right? That all of the Bible is pointing us to the gospel. All culminates in Jesus. So I just say if I have to have a default tone in preaching, I want it to be a tone of grace. So I have like a meta approach that if I want my default tone when I preach to be a gospel tone. Does that make any sense? And so that
absolutely.
I think it's Ray Ortlund that says a message of grace will attract people, but a culture of grace will keep people around. So,
isn't that great? Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So I say, I think so often we so desire to be prophetic in the pulpit, and there is certainly a time to be prophetic in the pulpit, but we are not called to be Old Testament prophets. We are called to be shepherds and pastors. We are heralds of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so as we preach the whole counsel of God, I want to bring that to bear as a shepherd of people who have been brought into a right relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. That's not saying there's never moments where we need to be prophetic or sharp or whatever else, but that if we're going to default to something, it's graciousness. And so that's helped me a lot of times see the way that has transformed the way my people even receive rebuke and correction when they know that typically I'm going to be gracious. So I was really convicted about that several years ago, and it dawned on me I was being really harsh. And so I talked to my associate pastor and just said, hey, let's try to show grace to the Lord's people in the pulpit. And he's helped me grow in that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Matt, let me ask you this as kind of we close our time out. You've talked about your experience there with revitalization. We've talked about how that's a struggle for a lot of pastors, and it's a long, arduous, it is a tough process for you and your family and for the church. It takes a lot of work, a lot of commitment. And then you're talking about the value of just preaching God's word, of letting the text drive your point and where you're going to go. Those two things, obviously, we see hand in hand. But our conversations that you and I have had and what we've seen of your ministry, we've seen you to be a very transparent person. You're not trying to be one person in the pulpit or one person with your staff or one person at lunch with a church member. You're Matt, no matter what.
That's the goal.
Yeah. you some people might even call you the baby pastor, so who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and that kind of stuff happens. And you embrace that. You don't mind laughing, and you don't mind struggling with people and everything. Let me ask you this as a way to encourage people who might be listening today. How does your personality, how do you let God use your personality in ministry for such a huge task like revitalization, and to take on the role of, all right, I'm going to be a preacher of God's word, and I want to be true to the authoritative, inerrant word of God, but I don't want to be like so-and-so or like so-and-so. I want to be man.
Yeah. So I always say there's kind of like, I think if you have proclivities toward that sort of thing, and I went Southern Seminary and loved the institution. I'm back at Southern Seminary now, working on another degree. So I love it. And I went to University of Mobile before that. So there's a lot of jerks in ministry, and there's a lot of guys who you just can't. It's like talking to a brick wall in ministry. They're so into these things that they can't just function and be a person. And I think we all feel tempted toward that, right? And I'm not trying to like downplay those things, but I think some guys feel such a need to be holy that they think that means you need to be sour and stern. And we've seen that, and that's a lie from the devil, you know, or that you need to be sort of aloof and that any sort of like personableness and love for your people and just the ability to hang out and go to dinner with folks or whatever, it feels like worldliness to a lot of us, I think, because maybe their lives don't always quite match up with ours or whatever else. And say, listen, if the Lord Jesus had done that, we would all be in big trouble.
Yeah,
right?
we would.
So it took me some time. This is a traditional church, and it's so early on, I was young, and so I felt this need to be more formal and that sort of thing. And then over time, I've had to kind of grow into, I've just got to be myself. So a few things like my dad helped me with that. My dad is not, he was a black sheep for a while and strayed from the Lord for a while. And he's always told me, like, if you become one of these fake preachers and don't act like yourself, like I'm going to disown you. And so he really keeps me in line. In fact, what he said is, if you get preacher hair, I'm gonna disown you if you become one of these preacher hair guys.
That's awesome. Preacher hair. I love it.
I don't think I have preacher hair because I still have a great relationship with my dad. He comes to church here. So
just enjoy the fact that you still have hair, man.
I have hair. Yeah, I do. So that's been really helpful. And then like, I don't know, like kind of just getting out of the bubble and spending 8 years pastoring in a church has just helped a lot. Where, and I had a mentor who helped me with this a lot too, where, you know, you can be yourself and serve the Lord. So when we'd gone through a tough season here, I just remember thinking, if I can't be me, I can't do this very long, and much longer at all. And so at that point, I just said, you know what? God put me here. I'm not gonna like rub. I don't want my personality to be the main thing. I don't want any of that. But I'm just gonna enjoy being here. I've got a lot of joy in what I'm doing. And if somebody doesn't like joy, I can't do much for them, you know. And by and large, I think our people have responded well to that. Now, I don't think. At the same time, I do think it's probably wise, right, not to just go full in on day one. And there are things I can say and do now that if I'd done on first day, I think our folks would have really had kind of been taken aback by. Now they're kind of used to it. But, you know, like one day, sometimes like it's kind of almost like a joke sometimes for some people. Sometimes I'll kind of get on a roll about something. And one Sunday morning, our music minister just kind of looked out in the crowd and said, do I need to go get him, you know, or whatever? And everybody starts laughing. Like, so it's kind of like people just kind of know what I'm like now. And I don't ever use that as a license just to say or do whatever I want. I want to honor our people, honor the Lord, but just with some joy and love, try to demonstrate that. So I think if you can find some joy in it and find a way to let your personality thrive in a situation, it helps with longevity. And pastors have a tendency to want to portray anything they do as a virtue, you know, like somebody the other day said, like, man, a friend of mine was like, yeah, you've been at First Baptist for 8 years now, man. That's a pretty good tenure. I said, yeah, and I don't even tweet about it every day, you know, like, and so I think it's real easy. Like somebody was like, man, more pastors ought to make the sacrifice and stay. And I was like, that's where you're wrong. It's not a sacrifice for me to stay here. It's great. Like, I love it. They treat me really well and love me, and they listen to the word every Sunday, and they love my family. And I get gift certificates to Pruitt's Barbecue for Pastor Appreciation Month.
Oh,
and, you know what I mean? So they just, give me nice, they're sweet to me and kind to me and love my family, love my kids and everything else. To say, why? It would be disingenuous. How insulting would it be for the Lord's people if I were on Twitter every day, like, you just need to, no matter what, stay committed and stay it out and stick it out. That's such an insult. Like, I'm not here as a sacrifice, and I'm not sacrificing other opportunities. I'm here because I love it.
Amen.
You know what I mean? Like I didn't always love it, but I'm here because I love it. And I think if I hadn't begun to figure out how to be me and kind of who I've always been, and I was, senior class clown kind of thing. And if I couldn't,
really?
yeah. And if I hadn't been able to figure that out, I don't think I would be able to say that now. I don't think I would be able to say, I'm enjoying it, and that's why I'm at First Baptist Gadsden, because I love to be at First Baptist Gadsden. And if
you guys heard that here, you can be in ministry in the middle of revitalization, in the middle of a pandemic, and you can still have joy in ministry.
Right. And if you can't, listen, I'll just say our lives, let me just say this, our lives are bigger than our ministries.
Amen.
And like our lives and our relationship with Christ is worth more than our pastorates.
Amen.
That's exactly right.
And I had a guy in my church in the darkest moments of our revitalization effort at First Baptist Gadsden. I think I'm a regular pastor now. I wouldn't call what we're doing now revitalization. But in other words, if somebody came and took my place here right now, it would be kind of disingenuous to say that they're doing church revitalization.
Right.
But when it really was like kind of stereotypical revitalization effort, it was a rough time, man. I was struggling, and a doctor in our church who I love dearly took me to coffee one day, and he said, "Matt, your life and your ministry is not bound up in whether this works or not." Mm. And he's like, there's life beyond this. And like, you've got to get some air here and just know that like, you can't run yourself into the ground for the sake of this. Like, do all you can. But you know what? That gave me enough oxygen to keep going, just to come up for air for a minute. So that's what I would just say to any brother who's struggling right now. I think we get this idea that our lives are bound up with our ministries in a way that I think is really unhelpful and really unhealthy. I would just say, if you can't find joy, pray for a season that the Lord will give you joy where you are. But at some point or another, maybe the Lord's releasing you from being in that assignment because you're not serving your people or your family or yourself well in that moment. I just hate the thought of
a sabbatical. Yeah. I mean, some kind of time out. Yeah.
And I'm not saying everybody's always going to be happy in ministry. I've got 1,000 different things that are stressing me out right now. You know what I mean? And things I'm figuring out how to figure and juggle. And this, I'm not saying eventually it becomes perfect or whatever else, but I think that's the beauty of Christian theology, is that we find joy in all circumstances, know? And it's sort of like, our people are in the hospital and getting laid off or fired, and they're struggling and going through all this different kind of stuff. And here we get to get paid to study and preach the Bible every week. And surely we can find some joy in those circumstances, right, if they're finding joy in their cancer diagnosis or whatever else, if that's really what we're preaching. It's hard. You have to fight for it. You have to struggle with it to find the joy in it every day. But to me, that's one of the big keys for longevity and everything else in ministry. Yeah.
That's well said, man. What an encouragement. What a way to end our conversation. Matt, thank you so much, man, for spending a few minutes with us and for just sharing a little bit about your ministry, your life, and we appreciate it, man.
Man, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Enjoyed it, Matt. Thank you guys for listening.
Yep. We know you've been encouraged and equipped, so we'll see you next time.